Hello, Teresa, and welcome to my YouTube channel.
Thank
Ter-
you.
You're so welcome. So if you want to talk about your story of how the Jehovah's Witnesses came into your life.
Well, at the time, my family was living in Arizona, and I was about 4 or 5 years old, and a woman came to the door, and my mother, who was, I guess, at a weak point in her life, um, fell for it. And I know that Jehovah Witnesses kind of feed on the weak. And so I guess she started studying with this woman. And then we moved to Houston, Texas when I was about 5 or 6. And that it became really disruptive to me because I realized at that young age that I was not going to be able to celebrate holidays. And I knew something was wrong, but being that young, you don't know what the whole story is. And so what happened over a short period of time was that I failed the first grade because I was so upset about this. And also, it affected my sleep. I became an insomniac at that early age. I remember I would lay in the middle of the night thinking and trying to figure out what was going on. And so, unfortunately, the um, insomnia stayed with me till I was about the age of 60. Then, after that, what I remember was I was not going to be in the same classes as I was with the kids in the first grade. And during the elementary school, I remember that if a holiday did come up, like if there was going to be a Christmas party or a Valentine's event, I would get sent home. So I would try to see if I could stay, but for these events. But what would happen is it was kind of based on how the teachers respected what my parents' wishes were, which were to send me home. Some would not send me home, and I'm assuming they felt sorry for me, and other ones did. And also in elementary school, I wore very thick glasses, and so I got teased a lot about that. But I also got teased in elementary school because of being a Jehovah Witness. And I think the reason why I was being teased was that some of these kids would go to their parents and go, okay, there's, this girl in school that gets sent home during the holidays and she's a Jehovah Witness. And then, of course, those parents would say things like, well, she's Jewish. And so they thought I was Jewish and I would get, disrespected. Now, this was happening from the mid 60s to about the early 70s. And then at 13, I went into junior high school. And in junior high school, that first year, I was kind of like this innocent girl from elementary school. And then when I turned 14, I started to retaliate. And, I really wanted to be like the rest of the kids. So I started smoking cigarettes with them and skipping class and all of that. Now, during that time, from the age of 5 to 13, 14, 15, my mother, she was abusive, physically and emotionally. So I couldn't get any peace at school. I couldn't get any peace at home. So it was a very rough time for me. There were habits that, I developed, which was like biting my nails and pulling out, my hair at the top. And just basically trying to survive and be like the other kids. So when I was 15, on my birthday, I decided I was done. I talked to one of the elders and said that I did not want to be involved in this anymore. And fortunately for me, I never got baptized. So I wasn't going through that shunning period or, being disfellowshipped. Of course, my mother, she freaked out. I remember her talking to my dad. It was like, oh, what are we going to tell our friends? We're going to have to tell them that she's sick. She's spiritually sick and blah, blah, blah. It got so uncomfortable for me to live at home that I went to live with a neighbor and her family the next block over. Actually, that happened when I was 14, now that I think about it. So I stayed there for a little while, and then I, got back home, and it was hell. And my mother at 16 decided to put me on a bus to Reno, Nevada. So that meant I spent 4 days and 3 nights on a bus by myself with strangers. During that time, too, I developed a severe kidney infection because my belief is extreme stress will affect your health in different ways. It kind of goes after the weakest part of your bodies. And I guess I developed this kidney infection, and it turned into, this a thing where I had to go into the hospital at 17 years old to have my kidneys flushed. And while I was there, my mother says, well, maybe you'll die, and you'll get resurrected and blah, blah, blah. So she apparently didn't care, if I was going to die. After that hospital stay, my parents decided that they wanted to move to Arkansas with my younger brother. And they asked me if I wanted to go, and I said no, because, well, for obvious reasons. So around 17, I started supporting myself. I worked at a cafeteria. I got a roommate, another gal that worked at the cafeteria. And yeah, I just basically started supporting myself. So after that, I had a boyfriend, and he was kind of abusive too. He was into alcohol and all of that. So at that time, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, as you are not, you were told at that time that 1975, that's when, Armageddon was going to come. So you were not taught on how to be an adult. You were not encouraged to go to college, to further your education. There was none of that kind of training at all. So in my late teens, I had to learn how to support myself and being an adult. And I remember for those 10 years, it was very challenging. Also, I wanted to go back a little bit. When I was 16, my mother put me in a psychiatric ward for a couple of months because she always felt like I was the problem. And I had therapists that I would talk to, and I was telling them what was going on, and they kind of thought my mother needed to be in the hospital than I. And after 2 months, I got out, and once again, it was very challenging to know how to, live your life as an adult. So after a while, what I was trying to do was develop friendships. And some of these friendships, they would kind of get upset going, well, we can't be friends with you because you were a Jehovah Witness. And it's like, well, I'm not anymore. So it was still trying to get accepted. And I was falling into relationships, boyfriends, of where I was not taught how to court, how to let a relationship develop and make it wholesome. And so I noticed what I would do is I would try to create these relationships with these guys of where I immediately wanted to move them in with them, so there really wasn't that much of a dating period. And so I'd move in, into these homes with a boyfriend, and those relationships usually only lasted about 4 years. Also, I wanted to say that my mother was a narcissist. And so I was kind of raised to be a narcissist. And eventually, over time, there were a couple of boyfriends that said, you're kind of like your mom. And so once I realized that, I kind of got out of that narcissistic way of life, if you want to call it that. And I also got into a relationship off and on with a person for 13 years who was definitely a narcissist. And he was a pathological liar. And I kept trying to make it work out. And I think for a couple of reasons. Yes, I did love the man. But also, that's all I knew was a life with a narcissist. So I guess I felt like that's how it was supposed to be. Also, I was trying to make the relationship work because I still needed a secure home to stay in. Because when you are raised as a Jehovah Witness, it's hard to hold a job, it's hard to hold on to relationships, etc. So eventually, over time, I did get out of that relationship. Now, over the years, I did try to establish a good relationship with my mother. I kind of wanted to prove to her that although I was not a Jehovah Witness, I was a good person. And we had lots of arguments and fallouts, and there was at one point where I didn't talk to her for 4 years, etc. And I was in a terrible, well, let me back up a little bit. My father, who was non-judgmental, he understood me, he was very good to me, but he was not raised to deal with someone like my mother. He came from a very loving family, and it was hard for him to fight with her. She always had the upper hand. She was the leader of the family. He died in 2009, I believe, from dementia. And I knew that once he passed away, that the family would eventually fall apart, because he was the glue. Um, 10 years before he passed away, I had a conversation with him. I said, look, I said, you don't have any retirement. I said, what are you going to do? I said, what if Armageddon doesn't come? You know? So he set up a life insurance, where my mother would be awarded, $250,000. She, would not let us be, the kids, my brother and I, be a part of this life insurance. So he passed away. And a few years later, I was in this really bad car accident, and uh, and a lot of things happened, and I had to sue the driver and the insurance company. Driver happened to be a friend of mine. He was intoxicated. I did not know that at the time. It was a big mess. And for 2 years after the lawsuit was filed, I couldn't work. So I didn't have any money. I was trying to survive. I eventually, was asking my mother for money, which I had to beg for, which she would reluctantly give to me. And that dependency on her lasted off and on for until about 2 years ago. So what happened was, my sister-in-law got involved in regards to checking to see, how much money my mother had given me over time, which was in the 5 figures. I wasn't keeping track. My mother wasn't keeping track. And so that kind of, obviously that weighed heavily on the relationship, because my mother, she was very, had always been money hungry. My father was an easygoing man, did not make a lot of money, and so having money was just on top of her uh, uh, wants. So anyway, an event happened a couple of years ago where my mother and I had another, fallout, if you will. And I decided at that time that I wanted to not communicate with her anymore, including my brother, who is a year and a half younger. He's an older. He is kind of like a younger male version of my mother. So he doesn't see anything past Jehovah Witness belief. So to her, for her and my brother, I was the bad guy. So I decided to cut all contact with them. And what happened was I had never felt better in my life. My insecurities were gone. I felt confident. I felt happy. And I still have not communicated with them. It was like one of the best decisions I'd ever made in my life. So that's my story.
Thank you so much for sharing, Teresa. And your mother is still alive?
Yes,
And you said your brother is an elder?
yes.
When was the last time you spoke to him?
Well, I tried to have a conversation with him once he found out how much money my mother had lent me over time. He was texting me, and I told him that, I was requesting that we would have a phone conversation, et cetera, et cetera. And he just would not do it. Because I wanted to explain to him, what I'd been through my entire life. He didn't really know. he didn't really care, I guess, or understand. I mean, he was always kind of under my mother's um, control. So as far as an actual conversation, it's probably been, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Well, thank you again for sharing. And your mom, how old is she now?
She will be 84 on April 1st.
Okay.
I'm 64.
Okay. Okay. It's been quite a while then you haven't spoken to her. And your father, you said he died in 2009?
Yes.
Okay. And he was an active witness when he died?
Yes, he was an elder as well.
Okay. Wow. It's a lot of two your brother and your dad, you said, were elders.
Yes.
Okay. And your mom, was she a pioneer?
I think she was, you know, in her 30s and 40s.
Mm.
She would do it 1 month out of the year,
Okay.
but she was definitely into going door to door, taking me door to door, which I hated doing, because sometimes people would throw you off the front lawn, uh, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So to expose a child to that kind of sales tactic
Mm.
is, I thought was really unhealthy.
Definitely. And as a narcissistic mother, everything is about appearance and how you look on the outside. So I'm sure that she wanted everything to look really presentable, especially being an elder's wife with you,
Yes.
brother. So that's a lot of pressure on you. And you said you even got put into a mental hospital, which is really crazy. Yeah, I think it's your story is very interesting. Even though you never got baptized into the religion, it affected you up until now, as you were talking about. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there anything that you feel like you would like to add to your story that you feel like you might have missed out on?
Well, I will say that um, I did try to commit suicide a couple of times. And the reason why I bring it up is because I know there's other Jehovah Witnesses and ex JWs that feel that same way. Is but hang in there. Stick to your guns. If you have to end some relationships, including family, it's worth it.
I have to agree with you on that one, Teresa. Very much so. Family can be some of the most toxic people that you'll ever encounter. So I
Yeah.
totally understand. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. And I think that there's a lot of people that will resonate with what you just said. And suicide is very dominant in just even thoughts of it in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community. So yeah, thank
Yes.
you so much for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for sharing your entire story. And of
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
course, thank you for watching this interview with Teresa.